So I'm going to talk about 20, 25 minutes of COVID stuff. I mean, I'm sure, I don't think anybody really wants to get anything longer than that. We're steeped in it. But on the other hand, we are going to be talking about things that are not typically discussed in media and indeed, except maybe quietly in hallways in academia. So we'll give it a shot and see where we go with this. As Riley brought up, yes, if I may use the technical term, the shit has hit the fan, and there are some really terrible things going on, particularly here in the United States, but elsewhere. If you look at the top five countries that have been hit hardest now at this point, you've got the United States, Brazil, India, Russia, and the UK, and they're all in essence run by rightist regimes. That's not a surprise. In most part, when the right gain control of a government is in essence to suppress efforts by anybody else to use governance for something other than enriching the rich. So, you know, the notion of governance being something other than that, and that, you know, it could be used, for instance, for preparing millions of people for an outbreak. What an idea, what a concept. Is not on they're on the table for them. I mean, so when they are confronted with a true crisis, they're completely, it is a matter of incompetence indeed, but it is also a matter of ethos. The desire and demand to make sure that all the resources gathered and used and produced by workers and by everyone else would be in essence used to enrich those who already have profit. So, you know, we can get all involved in the kind of particularities of Trump and Bolsonaro's personalities, their incompetence, their stupidity. But these are in essence built into the system. The refusal and failure to respond to what a crisis, as Riley put, that was well known to be oncoming. And we can beat up on the rightists, but also there's the issue of what neoliberal capitalism has placed us in. And we see here not only our failure to prepare here in the United States didn't just start in January, but extends back 40 years when much of what we know as the public commons, the things we do to help each other survive, was either abandoned or sold off. So the public healthcare system has been basically stripped down to an individualized relationship between you and a doctor if you happen to have insurance. But even under Obamacare, 28 million people are not insured, 24 million are underinsured, and it has come roaring in spades here. I mean, my view, pandemics are something of a mirror. They tell societies something about themselves, and we see ourselves in a really Dorian Gray kind of way. We're observing the darkest version of what had always been there. Going back certainly in the last 40 years, but of course, all the way back to the beginning of the United States as that was founded in part on slavery and genocide. And you can see how the methodology or the thinking about it, the ways in which a country is run for decades and hundreds of years, kind of recapitulated during crises. We see the attempt basically to force largely black and brown workers back into the meatpacking factories. Trump decided not to use the Defense Production Act to, in essence, produce personal protection equipment for nurses and doctors and everybody else. But as soon as the agribusiness snapped its fingers, he did so to, in essence, declare production of meat to be essential and forcing meatpacking workers back into the factories, which are and remain even now centers of contagion. And it's not just Trump. You see in the state various agribusiness state governors acting in kind. You have the governors of Nebraska and Iowa, in essence, cutting off access to unemployment insurance for meatpacking workers as a way of basically saying that if you don't go back to work, you can't feed your family. And it's very much, I mean, as if those of us who did not understand before, quite the extent to which racial capitalism extends itself. This is an obvious and clear example, an attempt to, in essence, push off the worst of the outbreak onto our Black and brown brothers and sisters. And it really speaks to the really the utter contempt for human life at present, and the desire to, in essence, keep capital accumulating at the expense of people's very lives. It happens every day, even before a pandemic, but as I said, this kind of underlines how obvious that system and process is. Let's see, I know some of you are, well, why don't we talk about COVID-19? What do we talk about? How did this come about? I've been researching diseases for about 25 years and got on the pandemic line of research in about 2005, looking at the H5N1, the first celebrity virus that emerged in the 21st century. If you recall, that one emerged out of Guangdong in China, spilled over into Hong Kong. It was an avian influenza that killed 60% of those who were infected. Luckily, it didn't go human to human. But since then, we've had a whole series of viruses that are newly emerged or re-emerged in a way that seem to indicate that they were something different. So we've had Ebola since the mid-70s. It typically would spill over, hit a couple villages in Central Africa, kill a whole bunch of people with a case fatality rate of 90%, and maybe kill a couple of gorilla or chimp troops. Terrible thing, but ostensibly marginalized into the forest area. But then we have 2013, we have an Ebola that is genetically very much the same as all the other Ebolas up until this point, but somehow is able to infect 35,000 people in West Africa, killing 11,000, leaving bodies in the streets of major regional capitals and threatening to go on the travel network. So Ebola, we've got Zika, we've got other avian influenzas, H7N9. We have here in the United States, A5N2 that emerged in 2015 and killed 50,000 poultry here in the Midwest. Didn't go human to human, thankfully, but we do have a swine influenza that emerged in 2009 off basically industrial hog farms in the United States. And the influenza genome is segmented, so different parts, different genes winded its way across the US and Asia, and then converged together on hog farms outside Mexico, were in essence Smithfield Food subsidiaries, before it spread around the world as a human-to-human infection. And if you remember, we were all worried in the early days of that pandemic, but it seemed not to be as deadly as we thought it might be. But people forget that 500,000 people were killed that first year from H1N1 2009. So we seem to have all these different pathogens emerging one after the other. And we all get swept up in the emergency of it. We all run to our search engines, look up the virology of the pathogen, the epidemiology of it, the clinical course, and of course those things are important, and we should always be paying attention to those things, and we should always have research dedicated to that work. But in essence, we are being strung emergency to emergency in such a way that we have basically lost sight of the kind of the structural aspects of why all these pathogens are emerging at what seems to be an increasing pace and an increasing extent, and in some ways increasing deadliness. And if we have time, we can unpack those. But for now, I missed SARS-1. Look, there's so many of them, it's hard to keep track. SARS-1 is a coronavirus that spilled over in Guangdong in China. It subsequently infected 8,000 people, most of them in China, but also in other places like Hanoi and Toronto. We were very lucky in that when someone was infected with SARS-1, once they become symptomatic, then that's when they're able to infect other people. So once people became symptomatic, meaning they show signs and symptoms of the infection, you can basically, even if you don't have a vaccine or any drugs, you can do 19th century public health. You can isolate them in a ward or at home and keep the infection from going person to person. That is not the case for this SARS, SARS-2, which seems to be capable of infecting people before symptoms emerge, and probably in part explains why it was able to go human to human and spread around the world. Now, of course, it comes the controversial part of well, as if what I have said so far is old news, but it hasn't been. But the controversial part is around how the pathogen emerged, why did it emerge, and so forth. We have an infection. The first indication was that it emerged at a wild foods market and a wet food market in Wuhan. And then now all sorts of different complications emerge about how that came about. I mean, in the market itself, about half of the samples seem to be positive, mostly on the end in which wild foods were being sold. So when I talk about wild foods, I'm saying animals that are differentiated from those more traditional livestock like hog and poultry. And of course, there's a kind of Orientalism involved in terms of how people are afraid of eating anything other than a traditional livestock. But of course, those animals are themselves can be sources of infection as well. But the kind of Wuhan story falls apart a little bit because some people were handling animals were infected, other people were infected before the outbreak at the market, typically many of these the actual spillover event probably didn't happen at the market. The virus itself originated in part from bats. Some of the genetic sequencing indicates that the closest relative was in part a bat that was sampled in Yunnan, which is a southwest province. And also it was some sort of recombinant with that of a pangolin infection, that is a SARS that had infected a pangolin in passing. The controversy comes because there's a camp of scientists, largely independent, who claim that it emerged out of a lab in Wuhan and spilled over. They don't necessarily think that it's actually bioengineered that way, but that there was a lab accident. Basically, the mainstream media has pushed that out of the way. Part of it, left and right, there are conspiracy theorists around this with cockeyed visions of how it emerged that way. There is the matter of Donald Trump attempting to pin the blame on China and doing so through reference to this lab. And so there are all sorts of cockamamie versions of this. But the more cogent version is that there was samples that there was a series of experiments done, not only in this lab, but elsewhere, called gain of function studies, in which they allow the virus to, in essence, pass through a series of animals, and in the course of doing so can develop attributes that would be significantly more dangerous for a human. Now, there's a lot more complication to this. I won't go into it now. But suffice to say that while I disagree with that hypothesis, in Big Farm's Big Flu, I did write about the possibility of an increasing possibility of these kind of lab accidents. In 2013, the Princeton University study came out that basically mapped the emergence of these biosafety labs 3 and 4. Those are labs that conduct experiments on the most dangerous pathogens. And this came out of the worry over the emergence of these new infections, H5N1 on, but also out of post 9/11, the whole focus on biosecurity. So the Princeton University study basically mapped out where these labs are, and there have been thousands of these new labs that have been built around the world. And even many of them, not all, but some of them are not necessarily the best well run. So a rare event, the possibility of a lab accident, bends toward an inevitability when you increase so many numbers that that at some point something like this might happen. Again, I don't necessarily agree that this is what happened this time. I think the genetics of the virus lends itself to more a so-called more natural and spillover. I put natural in quotes because the just like you know, in all these outbreaks that have occurred, whether it's the H5N1, whether it's the Sars one, whether it's the Ebola, what we see here is an increasing deforestation development spearheaded by agribusiness, mining, and logging into the last of the natural forests around the world. In basically increasing the interface between wild animals that are the natural reservoir for many of these pathogens. And while typically you might have spillover events happen now and then, taking out the village or two, as we discussed, when you get rid of forests, you in essence smooth out the pathway that these pathogens have. If many of you have ever been in a neotropical forest, it's really a complex place. A lot of different animals, a lot of different plants, and they're all interacting in all sorts of different ways. And that it introduces a kind of chaos in such a way, an ecological chaos that keeps any one pathogen from being able to line up all the hosts it needs to be able to shoot out through the through all the different hosts and make its way out onto the global travel network. So in essence, the forests do work for us. And by virtue of their own complexity, they're able to box in many of the deadly pathogens, keeping them from going, you know, shooting out of their reservoirs and into human settlements. And in some sense, our group got in some trouble when we called the West African outbreak the Neoliberal Ebola, in part because the virus itself, as I said, hadn't changed that much. But you see West Africa being subjected to all sorts of structural adjustment and programs that demand the you know, defunding of public health programs and animal health programs, but also allowing multinationals to come in and cut into the forests and you know, for livestock and for logging and for plantation, commodity plantations. So what that does is, in the case of Ebola, it permitted the many of the frugivore bats and insectivore bats, which are the natural reservoir for Ebola. You know, when you have deforestation, most of the animals, many an animal might die out on taking with them their pathogen. But when you have got some of these animals, they don't roll over and die off. They actually behaviorally plastic. They make decisions to survive. And some of the bats actually like these plantations. So you, they'll basically migrate to them. And what's not to like? You've got all sorts of space. You can fly, you know, there's no competitors, no predators. You can fly between your roosting and foraging sites. Very easy to do, but along the way, you have an increasing interface with the humans who work there. So this is often typically the means by which some of the deadlier pathogens make its way into the human population, typically through labor that is taking care of livestock and crops. And given that West Africa, you know, given along with the introduction of multinational corporations, we have the decline in subsistence farming. So many of the people are in essence subjected to land grabbing and they have their lands taken from them. So they're forced to, in essence, work for these companies, or they're forced to cycle migrate into the cities where there's perhaps jobs available. So they migrate to the city and back home during harvest to help their family with the family plot. So there's how a virus can go into the deepest forests, spill over into humans at increasing rate and diversity of pathogens. And then by virtue of cycle migration or just flat out transport of livestock into the cities, these viruses can make their way to regional capitals and then onto the global travel network, which is the most integrated it's ever been. So a virus can be in a bat and one day, in a matter of weeks, end up inside a Miami sunbather in a couple of weeks. So we are truly integrated in ways that permit pathogens that were normally boxed in to suddenly be able to explode out and about. So that's at the end. So this is in our minds, in our group mind, this is these are kind of circuits of production that are basically popping up all over around the world in this way, where industrial agriculture cuts into the forests. Some of the spillover events happen at that point of contact. Ebola is a good example of that. Others are happening more closer to the city. So you have industrial livestock, hog and poultry. So some of the influenzas that are able to be selected for greater deadliness on the industrial farms are able to spill over there and closer into the cities. And I think H1N1 2009 and outside Mexico City is an excellent example of that. And then some of these pathogens are emerging in a very complex way across these circuits of production. So you have something like the Sars, which are typically in many of the bats through Central and South China, but of course there are coronaviruses around the world. But in this case, you have increasing encroachment in China, and that has led to increasing spillover, and coronaviruses are able to infect multiple other hosts. So, you know, we've sampled it in civets and some of these other wild food animals, civets. There's the pangolin, of course, but there's also been samples found in hog, industrial hog livestock as well there. And there have been a number of human SARS cases that didn't go anywhere, but didn't infect humans since 2000, 2003, when SARS-1 first emerged. My interpretation of it is that some of the countries, this is a more political interpretation, some of the countries, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, basically they decided that they weren't going to be merely the refrigerator, as it were, for Europe and the United States, that they were going to pull their populations out of poverty by their version of capitalism. And you know, it's not for me to say whether or not it's a good decision. That's their country, their countries, and but in the course of doing so, in lifting many millions out of poverty and leaving many millions behind, the choice was to, in essence, increasingly cut into their resources in a way that has led to emergence of some of these pathogens. Now, that's not to let the United States or Europe off the hook. We've done the same ourselves. H5N2 is here in the United States. You have an influenza H5NX that was circulating in various European countries. So in essence, this is a globalized problem, a global problem. And, but it is fascinating the way each country has their version of basically interfacing with global capitalism, and in a very locale specific way that leads to the emergence of very specific pathogens that happen to be circulating in their borders for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So the COVID-19, SARS-2, in my mind, emerged somewhere along in the middle there. At some point, the bat strain and the pangolin strain got together. I know my lab theory colleagues disagree with me, but I will push back in a matter of days. I've got to pay another post coming up on this. But I think it's clear that some of these pathogens are operating with many years of time to experiment across different hosts and over large stretches of geographic space, in this case over multiple provinces in China, to basically experiment in such a way that ultimately, while many of the SARS that may have hit humans never actually went human to human, again, in this case, you have billions of animals and mixes of animals and livestock and humans through which these pathogens are experimenting in such a way that permits the pathogens to emerge. And upon a physical characteristic, a phenotype that allows them to solve the human immune system and spread easily. And then, subsequently, once it hits the global travel network, it's pretty much over. The horse has left the barn, as it were. And, at that point, all we can do is batten down the public health hatch. There's certainly a left program in that way. We want to demand whatever vaccines are developed or are made available to everybody without costs. We want to make sure that everything, here's the thing, everything Donald Trump has asked for or pushed through, we want to do the opposite. So you ever were worried about a particular decision about what programs should be done or what decisions should be made, probably if Trump says something, it's probably the other way we should be going. That's what the terrible thing is at this point. And I'm certainly not a member of the Democratic Party. They have a lot to do with how neoliberalism came about, how the public health system was in essence sold off, how the medical system was in essence turned into a bunch of billable moments between you and your doctor, how even any everyday person who wanted to do the right thing, and there's that example of the medical supply salesman came back from China, back to Miami. He wanted to do the right thing. He had flu symptoms. He went to this hospital to be tested. He worried that his Obamacare would not cover it, and he was right. It covered it. They were able to do the test, but he was basically charged over $3,000 for just his test. What does that do in terms of telling people about participating in kind of the social enterprise necessary to be able for all of us to rally around and defeat this outbreak? And I see, presently we're in a pitched battle where those who are supposed to be defending us, as Riley brought up, are not doing a damn thing. In fact, they're doing everything to protect themselves. And it's an indication about what they plan to do in terms of how they will respond to climate change as well. In essence, they are prepared to consign millions of people to the ash heap. They're prepared to continue to accumulate capital atop of many a body, not just around the world in countries that are poor, but here in the United States as well.